When a rival tribe murdered her husband, they sent messengers to force his queen into marriage. They expected tears. They expected surrender. Instead, she welcomed them with a smile and launched one of the most brutal, creative, and cold-blooded revenge campaigns in all of history. This is the story of a queen's epic payback, a masterclass in vengeance so savage that its architect would, somehow, be remembered forever as a saint. Back in the 10th century, in the wild forests of Eastern Europe, a new empire called the Kievan Rus was being built. Think of it as a loose network of Slavic and Viking tribes, all held together by tribute, swords, and the tough-as-nails rulers in charge. At the top were Prince Igor of Kiev and his wife Olga, who was rumored to have Viking blood. Igor was your typical 10th century prince, always pushing to expand his territory and get more treasure. A ruler's power was all about loyalty, and that loyalty was paid in tribute. One of these tribes, the Drevlians, had a rocky relationship with Kiev. For a while, they paid up, but you could tell they weren't happy about it. In 945, things exploded. Igor went to the Drevlians to collect his yearly payment. Seeing his army, they paid him. But on the way home, Igor got greedy. Fatally greedy. The primary chronicle, our main source for this story, says Igor thought the payment wasn't enough. So he sent most of his army home and, with just a few guards, turned back to demand more. For the Drevlians, this was the last straw. It was a massive insult. Their own prince, Mal, riled up his people, saying, "If a wolf gets into the sheep pen, he'll kill the whole flock unless you kill him first. If we don't kill Igor now, he'll destroy us all." That's all they needed to hear. They ambushed Igor and his small crew. What they did next wasn't just an execution. It was a terrifying message. They captured Igor, bent 2 massive birch trees down to the ground, tied one of his legs to each tree, and then let them go. The trees snapped back up, tearing Igor's body apart. It was an unbelievably gruesome death meant to strike fear into Kiev. But when the news reached his wife, Olga, it didn't create fear. It created a queen. With their son only 3 years old, Olga, a woman nobody really paid attention to before, was now in charge. The Drevlians had killed a king, but they just created their worst nightmare. The Drevlians, feeling pretty good about themselves, made their first huge mistake. They completely underestimated Olga. They thought with Igor gone, they could just absorb Kiev. Their plan was as arrogant as it gets. Their prince Mal would marry Olga, uniting the 2 lands under Drevlian rule. To them, a queen without a king was just a pawn on the board. They figured she'd be scared and weak enough to accept a deal to save her own skin. So, Prince Mal sent a team of his 20 best diplomats to Kiev. They rolled up on boats, swaggering and confident. Their message was simple. "We got rid of your terrible husband. Now you're going to marry our awesome prince." It was an unbelievable insult. They weren't just asking her to forgive the people who brutally murdered her husband. They were demanding she marry their leader and submit. But when Olga stood before them, she didn't scream or cry. Instead, she showed the first flash of her manipulative genius. She pretended to agree with them. She told them their proposal sounded good, and that she couldn't bring her husband back from the dead anyway. She told them to go back to their boats for the night, and tomorrow she'd give them a great honor. She told them to act proud and demand to be carried in their boat to her court as a sign of respect. The Drevlians totally bought it. They saw a woman surrendering to the inevitable. They had no idea they were talking to the architect of their doom, who was already laying the first trap. The next morning, the Drevlian envoys were ready for their big moment. When Olga's people came, the envoys arrogantly demanded to be carried in their boat. The Kievan soldiers lifted the boat with all 20 Drevlians inside onto their shoulders and paraded them through the city. The envoys felt like rock stars, but they weren't heading to the palace. While they were sleeping, Olga had ordered a massive, deep trench dug in her courtyard. As the procession reached the pit, the soldiers just tipped the boat, and all 20 diplomats tumbled into the dirt. Their fancy clothes were ruined, and their cheers turned to screams of terror. Olga herself walked to the edge of the trench, looked down at them, and with pure ice in her voice, asked if they were enjoying the honor she had promised. Before they could even process what was happening, she gave the order. Her soldiers started shoveling, burying the envoys alive right there in their boat. The first part of her revenge was done. 20 of the Drevlians' best men were gone, but Olga was just getting started. With the first delegation buried, Olga immediately planned her next move. She wasn't just after blood, she was taking out the entire Drevlian leadership, piece by piece. Before anyone could find out what happened, she sent a message to Prince Mal. With terrifying cunning, she told him she accepted the marriage proposal, but needed a bigger, more impressive escort. Those 20 guys just weren't enough. She demanded that the Drevlians send their most distinguished men to bring her to their prince with the honor she deserved. Prince Mal, clueless about the fate of his first team, was ecstatic. He thought this was a great sign, so he gathered the best of the best, his top governors, chieftains, and officials, and sent them all to Kiev. He was literally sending his entire government into a trap. When this elite group arrived, Olga put on an even bigger show of hospitality. She welcomed them and suggested they clean up in her bathhouse after their long journey. A hot bath sounded amazing to the tired Drevlians, so they eagerly went inside, leaving their weapons and any suspicions behind. Once they were all in, the doors were barred from the outside. The Drevlian nobles were trapped. Then Olga gave her second command: set the bathhouse on fire. The wooden building went up in flames. The men inside were either burned alive or suffocated from the smoke. Just like that, Olga had eliminated the Drevlian diplomats and their ruling class. Her revenge was getting more brutal with every step, and she was nowhere near done. After wiping out the Drevlian leadership twice, Olga moved on to the third, and maybe the most diabolical part of her plan. She sent another message to the Drevlian capital, Iskorostin. This time, she said she was finally on her way, but first, she had to do her duty as a widow. She wanted to hold a funeral feast at her husband's tomb in the very city where he was killed. "Prepare a ton of mead," she commanded, "so I can weep on his grave and hold a feast for him." The remaining Drevlians, still totally in the dark, were relieved. They thought this ceremony would finally end the conflict and seal the deal for her marriage to Prince Mal. So they brewed huge amounts of mead and welcomed her into their city. Olga showed up with just a small group of followers, her face a perfect mask of sadness. She cried at the grave, and her grief looked completely real. As the feast began, she encouraged the Drevlians to drink up and honor her dead husband. The Drevlians, eager to please their future queen, drank heavily. Soon, the very men who had killed or celebrated Igor's death were completely wasted. As they stumbled around in a drunken haze, Olga's mask dropped. The grieving widow was gone, and the Avenger was back. Seeing her enemies totally helpless, she gave a quiet signal to her soldiers, who had been ordered to stay sober. They drew their swords. The scene turned into an absolute bloodbath. The drunk, defenseless Drevlians were slaughtered where they sat. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The primary chronicle says 5,000 Drevlians were killed that night. As the sun came up, Olga and her followers rode back to Kiev, leaving behind a field of bodies. The massacres of the diplomats, nobles, and feasters had destroyed the Drevlian leadership, but Olga still wasn't satisfied. Her revenge wasn't just about killing people, it was about wiping the very memory of their defiance off the face of the earth. She got back to Kiev, raised a full army, and marched on the Drevlian capital, Iskorostin. the exact place where her husband was executed. The remaining Drevlian soldiers tried to fight back, but they were leaderless and quickly defeated. The survivors ran back inside the city walls, hoping to wait her out. The siege began and lasted for an entire year. The people of Iskorostin were starving, but they were too terrified of Olga to surrender. When it seemed like her army couldn't break through the walls, Olga switched tactics from brute force to insane creativity. She sent a message into the city, sounding surprisingly peaceful. "Why are you still holding out?" she asked. "All your other towns have surrendered. Are you trying to starve to death?" The exhausted defenders said they'd pay tribute, but they were scared she still wanted revenge. Olga pretended her vengeance was satisfied. Then she made a bizarre request. "I don't want harsh tribute," she said. "Just give me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house." The people of Iskorostin couldn't believe their luck. Birds. That seemed like nothing. They quickly gathered the birds and sent them out, thinking their nightmare was finally over. Olga waited for nightfall. Then she ordered her soldiers to do something crazy. Tie a small piece of cloth with sulfur to each bird's leg. As it got dark, she gave the order. The cloths were lit on fire and the birds were released. The pigeons flew back to their coops and the sparrows flew back to their nests under the roofs of the houses. Within moments, hundreds of fires started all at once across the wooden city. The primary Chronicles says, "There was not a house that was not consumed, and it was impossible to extinguish the flames because all the houses caught fire at once." As the terrified citizens fled the inferno, they ran straight into Olga's army. She ordered her soldiers to capture them. Some were killed on the spot, others were given away as slaves, and the rest were forced to pay a crushing tribute for the rest of their lives. The city of Iskorostin was burned to ashes, and the Drevlian tribe was completely shattered. The queen's revenge was finally complete. With the Drevlians crushed, Olga's bloody revenge tour was over. She hadn't just avenged Igor, she had sent a terrifying message to every other tribe: do not mess with Kiev. She returned as a ruler who had proven she was a brilliant and ruthless strategist, securing the throne for her young son, Sviatoslav. For almost 2 decades, Olga ruled as regent, and she was great at it. She actually reformed the tribute system, the very thing that got her husband killed, making it more organized and stable. But the most shocking part of her story was still to come. This pagan queen, known for her incredible brutality, turned toward a new power: Christianity. Around the year 957, she traveled to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and was baptized, taking the Christian name Elena. She became the first ruler of the Rus to become a Christian. Her own people didn't immediately follow. Her son Sviatoslav was a hardcore pagan warrior and refused to convert. But Olga had planted a seed. It was her grandson, Vladimir the Great, who would eventually make Christianity the state religion in 988, changing the future of Eastern Europe forever. Olga died in 969. Her legacy is a massive contradiction. How does a woman who buried people alive, burned down a bathhouse full of nobles, and firebombed a city with birds become a saint? Well, in 1547, the Russian Orthodox Church made her one, calling her equal to the apostles. They didn't see her for the bloody revenge, but as the person who opened the door for Christianity in their land. She is now the patron saint of widows and converts. Olga of Kiev is one of history's most complex and incredible figures, a grieving wife turned merciless avenger, a brilliant strategist, and a pagan queen who ultimately became a holy saint. So what do you think? Was this the most savage revenge in history? Or was it a calculated move from a queen defending her throne and her son? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love insane stories from history, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's next.